Hi everyone, I'm super excited to host Shah, founder and principal of Kaizen AI. I had the fortune of meeting him at Blueprint this year when not only I attended his presentation, but the amount of work he's doing in India, across India, globally. And I was like, I should get him on the show to share his story. So thanks a lot, Jay, for your time.
Thanks so much, Mayur. It was great meeting you at Blueprint, and always nice to meet people with this ilk, right? It was very nice meeting you.
So, from your bachelor till this date, if I were to ask a few career highlights, what would those be?
I mean, that's a very long time. It's been a little while now. One of the things my father happens to run a very successful architecture firm in Mumbai, India, and that's been active for now. We completed 45 years. It was something which I was sort of visiting his office. I think every Sunday that I remember from when I was in the first grade, I was basically sitting in office or on site, and so I kind of almost grew up into this. And after bachelor's, one of the things that I generally did as I went through architecture school is I was very interested in just seeing different points of view because, I had obviously seen how he conducted his office. And so I would always try and visit and try and work at different offices across the country. People I just respected. I try and make sure they don't know who my father is and, try and just grunt and kind of try and see if I could make it myself. So I worked at a few offices and I was always, in we call it Kida. I was one of those guys who kind of got computers since I was quite young, and very funny. That's also so. Dad was one of the earlier adopters of a computer. He got one of the computers home. So way back in when I was in fourth grade or something, I was the only student in my school that had a computer at home. And, that was the guy who, my CPU was always open and I was swapping parts and I was doing those kind of things. So looking back, you kind of see, why I ended up doing what I was doing. But when I applied to architecture school, there was something I was particularly interested in where, somebody who looked at sort of the technology side of sort of architecture and design and merge that. So I had the opportunity and the good fortune of attending Columbia, which I think that does a particularly good job of merging technology. But also, I think because it being in New York City, the kind of professors that came in were professors who were practical, right? So I ended up taking a lot of classes across the real estate school, the business school, the journalism school. So I ended up doing a much wider sort of scope than I thought. A couple of things that I think really helped there. It allowed me to understand, all the different parts of a project, right? Unfortunately, architects sometimes get a bit of a God complex, unfortunately. I kind of feel, without me, there is no project. That's what happens if you kind of spend your life, under an architect, and that's kind of what you feel. And, when you go to, one of these classes, you're like, oh, but, you're part of a team. And yes, it's an important part of a team, but you're still, if everything else doesn't work, then, the prettiest building or the most best performing building doesn't make sense. And I think that understanding it gave me, along with being able to meet some incredible people at Columbia who are doing some path-breaking work as far as computing is concerned. Worked there in New York for some time. I graduated in 2009, which was an incredible time to graduate in New York City. You know, spent some time there. Happened to come back to India around the middle of 2010, and then I think what my real education in terms of putting buildings together, I think started where then I happened to join Dad. I could see how, serious buildings are put together. Most of his work ends up being very large scale, kind of very high rise buildings in some of the most sort of expensive parts of the city, or very, very large projects in the city. All the different people and how do you actually put things together. So it was, uh, you forget all of that technology and all of that stuff. And then slowly, I started bringing 3D printing in. I started doing all of those things. In 2017, I actually, just when the Vive came out, I actually started my first startup where I built out I think a really nice virtual reality platform built on Unity, where I was particularly concerned with what architects are concerned about, which is get the right leather material and get the right color of the sofa and things like that. Found out very quickly that everybody was very excited about it. So I had some people in the one Washington DC, one New York. Some people are very excited about it in India, but nobody really was willing to pay the money to be able to
Mm.
build that out. And that's one of the reasons I realized that with technology and real estate, that unless it directly adds to their bottom line, there's always this challenge of actually seeing throughput throughout, or you kind of really build something at scale where cost is almost negligible. And that kind of led me to come back to something that I had learned way back when: objective parameter optimization. Technology was right, was able to find something to work. And that's when I built out Kaizen AI. About 2018 is when I started that. We'll talk a bit more about what Kaizen does, but yeah, that's a little bit of highlight of what I did before building this out.
It's so many uh ups and downs and walkthrough. And especially this I can relate a lot, like cracking the right business model. And if you're selling to architects, they have 100 reasons not to adopt. So you have to be like X better and the economics should work. So it's part of the learning journey I had. So who would be like a mentor who, like, if you look back in your career, was very influential?
Honestly, I've had too many to count. I mean, what I found was, one of the things that really helped me was just curiosity in general. Uh, I think so many people who, I looked up to, from the business world, from the architecture world, from the real estate world. One of the things I really liked was that, as an architect, you happen to, especially in a city like Mumbai, where cost of real estate is so high, you ended up directly engaging with people who've done incredibly well for themselves, because otherwise they wouldn't be able to build. And so I've been incredibly lucky where I've had such a large number of people who have been mentors for me through this journey, right from inception and in different ways. Because the challenge with building something new, and in some ways what we've done is, at least I don't know of any other similar sort of platform elsewhere. So for us, we had to innovate on almost everything, how to talk about it, how to communicate, how to build out the business model. Everything was new. So for us, at every step, we were like trying something, and then you'd be like, this is, why wouldn't this kind of, because we the technology funnily worked very quickly. And so we were like, this is just the golden goose and everybody should want it. And then we realized, that's not how things work. And so
Mm.
you have to build out everything else to solve all the rest of the problems to truly achieve scale. Every my to so many sort of clients of ours who've given me time to actually have conversations about how this works, to my uncle who happens to be a VC. And I mean, I just honestly, I too many, I would be worried of giving names, because I would be like, there's so many and I'm sure I'll miss somebody. But I've been incredibly lucky where I've had a lot of people root for me and give me advice that has truly helped me in my career. And it's, I think that's been one of the reasons why we've been able to achieve what we've been able to achieve, because it's so hard to, I mean, it's hard to build anything out, and without the right advice at the right time, often it just, if you're looking at it from just a single lens, it unfortunately doesn't work particularly well. So I've just been very lucky with a lot of people, too many to name, but truly thank all of them.
Yeah. And especially our industry is very relationship driven, and it takes time to compound and build this relationship. Can you walk us through how Kaizen work in the whole process?
Sure. So, I'll what we've been able to do is most visible as a before and after. So, I'll run you through a project we were involved in recently, just so you get an idea. And through that, we'll talk a bit about the technology, and through that, we'll talk a bit about the business model, and whatever else you're curious about. So this is actually a project we completed very recently for um, the number one developer by sales as of today in India. So currently we're working across in cities, about 7 countries in the world. So across US, the Middle East, India tends to be our largest markets, but we work across some other countries also. But just as a case study, I think this is interesting to talk about. Um, this is a rather sort of uh, challenging project, because one, it was for the largest sort of development country in India today, but Also, within that company, this was the sort of largest project by expected revenue in possibly their entire history. So, you had a lot of eyes from the country actually on this particular project. And obviously, attached to that, they had some incredible expertise from around the world, some US based sort of consultants. You had Architect Structure MEP internationally, as well as some of the top firms out of India working on it. And we actually engaged on the project. We're a real estate optimization company. So we typically come into the project, when the base design is done, to look at opportunities for optimization. This was particularly interesting because, this is project is set up right on sort of Mumbai Central Park. So in one of the top locations in the city, and Mumbai real estate is akin to New York. It's incredibly high value. We're talking of very easily $2,000 a square foot here. In essence, a very very good location with a direct sea view at the bottom. So the architect has designed the project to make sure that the super luxury project, the apartments necessarily look towards the views. And you had a three-tower layout. And what Kaizen basically looks at is a potential of increasing profitability and environmental benefits while staying within design contours and regulatory requirements of that particular location. The couple of things that we do that are different is that we run this across 28 to 45 days. But interestingly, we have a model that's quite different, which we call the human AI human model. But let me take you through a little bit about this particular project. I'm happy to talk more about that later. The challenge here was that we'd come to a stage where schematic design was already complete, and that meant any big changes would have rather had a pretty big impact in terms of the project. So the intent was the master plan in the apartments. They did not really want to change, as well as the slab outlines one does not want to change. So that becomes a huge challenge because you want to optimize, but you can't really change anything. And so attached to the super dense project, you had 100 foot of podiums and 100 foot of basement excavation. The challenge was at about 40 feet, you had very, very hard rock that's right next to the ocean. So that meant about 2 extra years in terms of excavation. So you had a full set of plans that were done. But in a single statement, this is sort of where the challenge lied, where when they originally started the project, they had an expectation that for that amount of apartments and number of area, they would need to build out about 2.6 million square feet. This being 1,000 feet tall, more than 300 meters tall. You had outriggers and you had all sorts of things. So they had overshot the amount of construction area that was needed, as you had outriggers and service tanks and things like that. Attached to that, they also, what they had originally imagined, it was almost 2 years extra in terms of construction time, which becomes quite worrying, right? Because your sales cycle changes quite a lot. But with those problem statements, there was a very clear challenge that they don't want to change the master plan. They don't want to change any big changes would lead to a lot of other challenges on the project, which would push the project ahead. So how do you make minimum changes, but try to reach the kind of impact that one wanted? And so what we did on this project, interestingly, was took what was the baseline. So this is the 1,000 foot tower, which was the our largest tower. And if you don't change the apartments, you don't change the master plan. What can you change, which is sort of the common area? Is actually really simple, right? So your vertical transport consultants give you size of elevators, number of elevators. Regulatory tells you number of staircases, size of staircases. Fire and MVP requirements are technical requirements, and lift lobby width is sales requirements. So all of these are very clear technical requirements. And in essence, what we did was we built out like 150,000 iterations of just that common area without actually touching the apartments whatsoever. So what one is really doing is basically setting it out in such a way where you run all of these iterations basis what changes are actually feasible, uh, keeping the fact that the limitations and the parameters are well set. there's no value of us sending out 150,000 iterations to anybody. So we basically had, what we do is that we actually have experts at our end that are local to that jurisdiction, actually, who understand structure, MEP, regulatory, etc. Review this, and actually we present only two options out of all of those that actually work in that particular locations. Um, on that, we would kind of get feedback. We resolve structure, MEP, traffic circulation again at our end. This is done manually with experts that have worked in that jurisdiction. That's when we hand it over to the set and we respond to any questions, concerns that the client has. And that's when we exit the project. So that's when we do the handover of the project. So that's kind of from beginning to end, kind of the journey of any typical project. What is interesting on this particular thing is when we started, we were at that. When we ended this project, which is after handover, after all of the things are resolved, this floor plan actually looked like this. Now, between the left and the right, the ingredients are exactly the same in terms of all the technical requirements, elevator size, elevator numbers, staircase numbers, fire and MEP requirements, etc. the same. The common area, the slab area in the common area has reduced by 23.5% between the left and the right. Over and above that, one of the parameters we measure is structural integrity. And what that allowed us to do is, that's where the center of gravity, center of rigidity sits. We added mass there, which allowed us to actually reduce steel consumption by about 7.5% over and above the challenge here. Uh, Very interesting sort of a thought process where huge difference from a common area perspective, as well as a huge difference from a uh, uh, construction cost perspective. Imagine for 1,000-foot tower to do that on a per floor basis. And remember, in this particular location, the common areas are not part of FAR. But across a lot of countries where we work in, including Dubai and etc., the common areas are actually part of FAR. Often, when we're doing some of this optimization, you're actually not only looking at cost reduction, you're also you're looking at revenue increase. And so we did that across that's the 250-meter tall tower, 22% reduction, 10% steel consumption. That's the 210-meter tower, which is 15% reduction in common area, 5% across steel consumptions. You see a very huge kind of impact where you're reducing between 15 to 23% of common area without touching the apartment layouts whatsoever, without touching the elevation whatsoever, things that architects tend to be quite specific about. This is another interesting thing which tends to work particularly well across the Middle East and the US, where, parking is always a huge challenge in these super dense projects, right? So um, here, you can't change the slab outline, of course. India has a rather peculiar structural code which doesn't allow any transfer of, moment force columns. Over and above that, of course, here they were doing a 15-foot one-way driveway, which here the client expected a whole bunch of Maybachs and Rolls Royce, etc., to come. So they said, could you make this a minimum 20-foot driveway? Of course, car sizes stay the same from a regulatory standpoint. So after keeping the same slab outline, you had to resolve for traffic, circulation, structure, MEP, etc. At the end of this process, after handover, 91 surface car parks per floor on the same slab outline reached 133 surface car parks on the same floor plate. So this is massive from an optimization perspective, right? This is without any stack or mechanical parking. This is just number of surface car parks per floor has in essence increased by about 50% with the same slab construction area. And so this gives you a little bit of background in terms of just the impact of this, where by building out this model and by checking how the most optimal version on one level helps optimization on another level and kind of feeds through that, it gives you an impact of how strong something like this could be. And what that impact could be from a just in one slide, what we started with to when we left the project, and now they've actually started selling, so you kind of see the plans as per this online. But let's just talk about it from a numbers perspective. We started at this, which was about a 2.9 million square foot project with a 60 foot of excavation in very hard rock, with 2-year extra timeline. When we left the project, the final numbers were this. On this project, we were able to reduce almost 20% of construction area on the project, or almost 500,000 square feet of construction area on the project. We've barely touched the apartments. We've not touched the elevation really. We're changing things that are all technical requirements, and so if you're able to solve for the technical requirements better, it's always better. And you went from 19 levels of parking to 13 levels of parking while providing more car parks, and actually went from 30 meters of excavation, 100 feet of excavation, to 40 feet of excavation, saving almost 2 years of construction time. Over and above that, actually being able to reduce steel quantity by about 7.5% and concrete quantity by 11%, both on a per square foot basis. So you're looking at a tremendous amount of value within a tremendous amount of limitations, right? Because you can't really change anything. And think about this from an environmental and from a maintenance perspective, because what is it that we've reduced? We've reduced areas that are common areas, parking, etc. So, if one is not using their apartment or not using their room, they have the opportunity of switching off the lights, they're switching off the heating, the air conditioning. But you can't really switch off basement ventilation for that 75-year building lifespan. You can't really switch off lights. You can't really switch off sprinklers. You can't switch off anything across these areas that we're talking about. So there's a huge impact in terms of embodied carbon reduction, but there's an even larger impact in terms of just operating carbon reduction across that 75-year expected life cycle. So just imagine the kind of impact. And on a like-for-like basis, we do a detailed sustainability report, but on a like-for-like basis, that's a reduction of carbon impact by about 34%. And just think about that, the building industry accounts for about 39% of carbon on a worldwide basis. Just imagine if you're, obviously more wary about what we build out, because once you build it out, you have to basically, the energy cost is the energy cost for the life cycle of that building. And so if one is mindful of that, just imagine the kind of impact one is talking about doing. We've just been very lucky. So that's the CEO of the company actually talking about us. And we've just been rather lucky attached to some of that. And I don't want to talk about, a lot of other stuff, but just the impact across, what we just talking about, just on a tangible profitability basis, is about 45 million US dollars on this project. And I take the project margin a little bit with a grain of salt, because one doesn't know what the final revenue numbers, etc. are, but it gives you an idea of the kind of impact that something like this could build into projects. And it's something which, is not an exception to the rule. We've been doing projects across the US, the Middle East, India, and across different mortalities. And, we've seen values from 70 million US dollars to crossing 100 million US dollars on single projects. And we're doing this across hospitality and commercial and residential and healthcare and all sorts of things. So it's a pretty huge impact, right? When you put the background of something like this across, uh, projects, what that means for somebody to say that, the average margin that somebody typically looks at in the US is 10 to 15%, across the developing countries between 25 to 30%, right? Imagine instead of that 15% margin, you're able to kind of build out a 25% margin. That, how valuable that would be, and what impact that could have sort of on a company and on a real estate project. So, just some really well-known people and talking about us. But um, you know, talking a bit on the business model, if you have some time, I'm happy to take you through, how, one was kind of getting the technology to work. And I think we were able to do that rather successfully across multiple regions. But, very interestingly, as startup, guys, sometimes you feel, the technology works, the rest of it is easy. And one
Mm.
finds that that's rarely the case. So if you have some time, happy to run you through this, or happy to talk more on the other stuff.
So Shah, I was about to ask this, like often the incentives of the parties involved in the whole construction aren't aligned with the developer, because some people are paid on total construction costs. So if they do cost reductions, then they're cutting their own uh, total whatever expenses they can bill to. So yeah, would love to know about your business model.
Sure. So yeah, you're very right, right? Finally, the incentives would need to be aligned between what we're doing. And this is just for us, the background worked. it's just an incredibly expensive model to run. And developers in general tend to have a challenge with having large amounts of money paid upfront until they see that value, right? When you usually meet people who have been doing this for an incredible amount of time and some are doing some of the largest projects in the world, they often are like, no, no, we know what we're doing. We've got the right teams. We've got some of the best guys working for us as consultants. And what we found was to bring this in, we had to sort of change the business model where it is an incredibly expensive model to run. I mean, from a compute perspective, you can imagine the amount of polygons and the amount of processing we need to do at the background. It's incredibly expensive to run. And for us, that became a huge challenge. That how do we actually present this in a way that makes sense? Because to be able to show that value on that project, we need to run it, which is hundreds of thousands of US dollars. And, uh, they're not paying that upfront. And which is why we had to kind of take this decision where we're like, we put our money where our mouth is. And we're like, we'll run it at our cost as long as, there is value there and, the client is willing to pay. We actually then become an ROI partner where we take a percentage of the realized gain that is accepted by the client. So we're completely aligned in terms of what is value very, very early on. And that allows us to then engage in a way where we're just partners with them, not a software vendor, not anything like that. We're just working with them to make sure that they see success and we see shared success. That allowed us to have a much easier model for adoption, allowed us to scale much, much faster. And this was the other challenge, which is, we think again that, what we want to do typically, right? You want to, if you get this built out, which is the software side, you want to sell that and you want to, maximize because scale comes from there. The human side actually, reduces scale. But what we found is that instead of, in trying to sell it, it's so complicated to be able to train it or to explain it or to be able to get them to run it or spend that kind of money. So we had to actually build out the human side on both sides, where we actually then first understand from them, what is the challenges they face, what are the limitations they face, etc. We then do all the running at our end. And then we have experts at our end who have worked in that jurisdiction, who actually look at the 2030 optimized options, pick the ones that would work, and only then we do a handover, because buildability, codal conformity, liability, all of these are huge concerns, right? On projects, on real estate projects. So the idea here was we had to own the entire model from beginning to end to make it viable for it to actually run. So it's not, a typical product-based model. You had to build out a product plus service to make sure that the client actually saw the value and then was able to kind of take advantage of it. And this is how we were able to actually run the value. So yeah, that's a little bit about what we've been able to do all this while. But that's kind of where I find that we need not only think about what we would like to do, right? Which often when you kind of crack something, you find everybody should use it, and you kind of I think it really helped us to look at it from their point of view. And this is where the mentors, etc., became very valuable, where we could actually understand from them how could we solve their problems really, to then make sure that it is viable and feasible, etc., from that point of view. So yeah, that's a bit about what Kaizen does, and hope that was interesting. I can of course go on, but I don't want to jeopardize time. Hopefully that was interesting enough for you.
Yes, definitely like a great product. And the value proposition is also, I feel, we a lot of time we innovate on the product side, but sometimes innovation on the business model and giving a no-brainer offer can also move the adoption very fast. One is like, okay, building great product, and then is cracking distribution.
Absolutely right. And you can't do one without the other, right? And the challenge with I was recently at Howard Business School, and we did I was asked to do like a live case study there, and specifically on how does one generate business models, right? Because this does not exist today as a just from a cost base. Usually, how real estate worked is, okay, how many people are needed to do it? What's the cost per person? Okay, let's just kind of, and when that completely goes out the window and there's a huge upfront cost, how do you actually have adoption in something like that? And then you don't, anything new, right, is going to need to change the status quo. It's going to need to do all of these things together, because it's not only about, the first one through the wall is always bloodied, right? And there's a reason for that. Because if you're trying to bring something new to the market, if you're kind of thinking of, oh, I cracked this and this is mind blowing and the technology works, but if one doesn't solve for the rest of the things, that's what you're going to be. You're going to be an incredible technology that somebody else is going to take advantage of, and to be able to actually scale it. And which is why, I'm always curious and always kind of looking for opportunities to learn how could we better, whatever we're doing across the value chain, because I think that's how we actually see success and that's how we see adoption, right? And I'm incredibly excited about, one is obviously the business side, and I'm happy. Make more money is always good, right? But I see it also from a point of view of just carbon, right? If you think about the amount of stuff we are building and, the impact of what we're doing from a long-term perspective, it's massive. If you're able to optimize, even, I mean, this was huge, right? 34% impact, but let's say it's not 34%. Let's say it's 5% through the life of that building project. It's massive. It's massive. One of the things we actually count this. So we, across the building project, we actually do we count what is the tangible profitability we increased, and we also count what is the carbon that we've tangibly improved through that building life cycle. Just across the 180 odd projects, our carbon offset is close to, grounding of all commercial airplanes for 9 months globally. That's a serious, because again, you think about the building industry as just embodied carbon, but it's not embodied carbon. Once you build it out for that building life cycle, that is going to take operating a carbon, right? You can't not do that. So our carbon footprint is much wider, not because of just that upfront carbon, but also across the life cycle. And so I truly feel that this is something which, imagine, and we're still doing comparatively smaller stuff. Right? So we've had a couple of people reach out to do this at, local government level and government level, etc. But just imagine being able to scale this across, literally towns and cities and things like that. And that's where we're really excited, because that means you're able to, do a lot in the same amount of carbon, same amount of money. And so I think that is a mission, is something which we're particularly excited about.
That's amazing, Jay. Like, thanks a lot for sharing the whole journey, the product you're building. Very exciting times. Thanks for all the insights.
Happy to do it.